አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን እምቢኝ ብሎ የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራዕያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎም ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ @gmail.com፣ በዌብሳይታችን www.adebabai.com። ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ።
አደባባይ ሚዲያ የኔ ነው። አደባባይ ሚዲያ የኔም ነው። አደባባይ ሚዲያ የኔ ነው። አደባባይ ሚዲያ የሁላችንም ነው። የኛ ቤተሰብ አደባባይ ሚዲያን ይመለከታል። የእናንተስ? Do your parents watch አደባባይ ሚዲያ? Watch, follow, subscribe and help አደባባይ። አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ።
Welcome everyone and thank you for joining us. This is Adebabay Media's Your Digest program. My name is Adebabay and I'll be your host for today. Today we're going to be talking about the different narratives of the war in Tigray. Right now, depending on what resources that you follow and you watch, there are at least two different narratives that are going around. One is that, TPLF is done for and it can't possibly come back to power. And the other is the TPLF is winning the war in Tigray and will definitely be victorious in a short amount of time. But this all depends on what you watch. Other narratives that are also out there are ones a bit different in nature that are trying to absolve TPLF of its crimes. Basically saying that Ethiopian army has started an unfair war against TPLF and therefore the people of Tigray for no other reason than just hate. And today we're going to talk about these different narratives that are put out and how that is affecting Ethiopia right now and its foreign relations. I'd like to invite everyone to share and like this conversation, and we'll be right back. There are two wars that are waged against Ethiopia. One is the one TPLF has started in the Tigray region, and the other one is the one that it is currently very active and being fought over the internet. That is the social media and also some Western medias. And then this is a way to correct the narratives. TPLF is trying to correct the narrative of who started the war, what happened in Mykandra, and what is going on currently in Tigray and Tigray region, the famine and all kinds of atrocities that we've been seeing and who's committing those crimes as well. Today, I have invited two guests that have been following this news, also being part of the Ethiopia Prevail team, and they're here to talk to us about what these different narratives are, how that's affecting Ethiopia, and how we can move forward. My first guest is Kalalai, and my other guest is Kudus. Thank you, Kalalai and Kudus, for being here.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Of course. Yes. And you guys are wearing Abashak Emis and I'm not, so you're making me look bad a bit, but in Kwana Derasachu.
Sorry we didn't send a memo.
I know, right? We should have definitely. We'll do better next time. I'll start with Kalalai. Could you introduce yourself a bit for our audience?
Okay, so thanks for having us here. Hope everyone's doing well on this Sunday afternoon. My name is Kalalai Emru. I was born and raised in Addis Ababa. I moved to the U.S. at the age of 12. My family and I reside in Northern California. I actually used to live in Seattle, Washington. So, here and I had a bit of a chat about Seattle, Washington, the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
I work for a large pharmaceutical corporation on a team that does more consulting type of work on strategic partnership with health systems to help improve patients' care and outcome. And I volunteer with different organizations more focused on healthcare, but currently the work that I'm doing with Glean, which is Global Ethiopian Advocacy Nexus, is helping with their technology and media production team. So it's more focused around the areas of video editing, production, communication, meeting support, petition, letter writing campaign, getting the votes out, and social media, tech support training, press release, and that sort of things.
Oh, that's amazing. We'll definitely talk about Glean in a little bit. Candice, could you introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity, Hewitt. I'm glad we came together for this engagement and glad to have also worked with you to materialize the program with hope to create some excitement and motivation for young Ethiopians, especially the second gens, to find their voice now more than ever, as this is a very critical time for the future of Ethiopia. As you said, my name is Candice. I was born in Addis, Ethiopia, and moved here at a very young age. Surprisingly, I was 12 too.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm currently in the Midwest, and I'm in human resources. I joined Glean Global Ethiopian Advocacy Nexus about 3 months ago. It was formed, I believe, in December 2020. And post the internal conflict in Ethiopia, Tigray region. And I joined towards January 2021.
No, it's amazing. So you guys may have one more year on me. I was 13 when I moved here, so not the same.
Important years.
All the same. You both mentioned Glean, and that's one of the resources that I've been seeing as far as being the forefront of correcting the misinformation TPLFists are putting out. So, could you tell us a bit about Glean, and if she missed anything, Kalila, you could add on to it as well?
Sure.
Sure. So Glean Global Advocacy Nexus, as I said, was formed in December 2020, right after the conflict started in the Tigray region. The purpose of Glean is to change the false narratives in the West and the media about Ethiopia. The purpose of the platform is to support the unity of Ethiopia and be that one voice for Ethiopia. Glean is not affiliated with any government or party. So the important piece also, I think, for other organizations came together because it was such a critical time. The narratives on the West and in the media was completely different from what was on the ground. So they kind of came together, so join as a group or individuals also to work within the organizations.
I love that. Kalila?
Yeah, no, I think I just addressed how Glean came together. I would say, one of the things that you would notice in the area of advocacy and diplomacy is that there are a lot of people doing the work, doing some great work. However, it tends to be siloed, and the reason why Glean was, born is out of that necessity and the gap that we saw with respect to the challenge for Ethiopia, and then that collective voice. So it's an organization that puts people together in the name of advocacy and public diplomacy, so we can work to promote Ethiopia's interests and the well-being of our people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially after the war in Tigray, we've seen, for me, I would call it baffling almost. Like, it's difficult to believe some of, the clear, blatant lies that were being put out, but there's no way for us to correct it because the idea is, who would know, right? Who would know? And no one in English is really specifically speaking as loud as TPLF is. So that the loudness kind of overshadows the truth. And that seems to be the trend of, the human rights organizations, the Western media, and even social media, who's tweeting what, has really driven the idea of this war more than the truth itself. So I guess y'all already touched on it a bit, but why is it specifically important for you to be part of this organization and this movement? Kalila, please start.
It's a good question. So why? First of all, I believe in the whole construct of community and the covenant of community, meaning I want to aim for a collective good. I believe in Ethiopia. I believe in Africa and the good that we could do together as one people. So it's a mindset, and it's also important to me because when I think about the future generation versus the generation of Ottawa and the legacy, it's it's something that it, gets me compelled to do more. So I feel like we defeated this common enemy 100, 25 years ago, and I have no doubt if we stand together as people today, which will require selflessness, effort, energy, we can do the same, and we could build our country, and we can have Ethiopia be the country that we all wish for. So, and I bring up Ottawa because there's a number of parallels, I feel like, and lessons that we can glean from that generation and what we have going on now between the Battle of Ottawa and then what we're trying to do, trying to create peace and prosperity in Ethiopia today. So it's yeah, that's why it's important and fascinating at the same time.
And I think also drawing into the parallel, right, during Ottawa, there were definitely Ethiopians that fought for Italy against Ethiopia as well. And that shows us, yes, we do have that history of, I think they call them Mascaris, that history of, betraying one's land and betraying one's people. But that's not the largest truth of Ethiopia for sure. So thank you for
Absolutely.
that. Yeah.
In fact, I've had someone recently say, but we need to stop getting high on Ottawa's accomplishment. Look, I know what people are saying, and I get it. I encounter people who say that, but I think it's fascinating for a number of reasons. And historians have written book about this because it's not just the love for freedom and independence, but Ottawa was an outcome, and we forget that behind it there was a huge culture of strategic thinking and that urge for freedom. That's why I felt like it's a mindset. And there's a lot of things that are not only parallel to what's going on today, but a lot of things our generation can take and learn to be implemented in the future.
Absolutely. And I think for people that say we need to start getting high off it, I'll tell them back off. Because I think when it comes to Ethiopia and remembering Ethiopia's history and holding on to it, there's that pressure of like, oh, that was just in the past. Like, forget about that.
Right.
But for me, we're still celebrating 4th of July in this country. And that was way before Ottawa, right? The Battle of Ottawa. And it's still celebrated as a big deal. It's still rehearsed. It's still, like we have a day off and such because, blood was paid for this freedom. It didn't come easy. So for us to say that's not as important, let's just forget about it, is really a disgrace not only to our history but to those that paid the price of life to give us the freedom that we need today. So I wouldn't listen to them. Never. Don't. And just the same question to you. Why is it important for you to be part of this organization?
So for me, and integrity matters. To me, it's just the way I was brought up, and I well understood that my voice matter. It's my mark of existence on earth, right? So I knew the importance of my voice before I well understood the power it had in shaping me. So interestingly, as a child, I grew up in a household where my parents had meetings with me and my siblings, serious meetings to collect our thoughts and ideas about major plan they had. At the time, it was silly for me to have had that discussion as it was just a distraction from playing outside, right?
Yeah.
But however, in my adult years, I well understood the impact of those meetings. In those meetings, I learned to express myself, present my thoughts, and listen for others do the same. The discussion went around until everyone was heard, including my parents' plan about the meeting and their upcoming action. That is the memory of Ethiopia that I have growing up. And in my adult years, I realized the power and positive contribution in life, with that, how that shaped me. So I think going back to your question, we have to listen to each other, right? We have to accept each other's truth. And it's not so much I'm right over the other story, but really it's important to listen to one another and kind of preserve integrity. Integrity is important to preserve our identity and kind of pass that to the next generation.
I love that answer. Oh man, I wish I learned to express myself as a young person. I think there's a lot of power, like you said, in learning at a very young age that your voice matters. So say thank you to your parents for me.
I think this generation knows, you know.
This generation knows for sure.
Yes. We just have to teach them the history, though, as it was taught to us and passed down, right? Nowadays, we do as much work correcting what's out there. So a lot more work, but yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump into the topic of the day, and it's a narrative workathon, right? Who's driving the narrative, especially when we're talking about, the cyber war. I don't know if that's the right name for it exactly, but what's going on with social media, what's going on with, the human rights advocates and activists and all the different organizations that are out there, and how that is shaping the policies, the foreign policies of, the EU and the US, which is definitely going to affect Ethiopia in turn, right? So let's talk a bit about what went on before the war in Tigray has started. What was the situation like? So specifically, what are the events that surround the war before the war happened? And Kalila, if you could start on that, and I guess you could add to it as well.
Sure. And just so people understand, and I'm sure your audience is well aware, but I want to give a quick, brief summary of how we got to where we got to even prior to the war. So we know that TPLF came into power after this huge, long-standing war in 1991, but they came to power and immediately deployed this ethnic federalism, right? I think we're one of very few countries in the entire world that has a constitution based on ethnic nationalism. And it was done to specifically rule by conquering the majority. So now imagine sowing a seed of division and hate and such a beautiful nation that we have. We know we are a diverse nation. We know that we have more than 80 ethnic groups and even more, languages and cultures. So when we talk about TPLF, they claim to represent the people of Tigray, which actually makes up less than 6% of the entire population. But in reality, it was 27 years of terror against the nation and ran the country as if it was a private institution that embezzled billions of dollars to benefit the few that made up the elite in TPLF and friends and family of TPLF. So it's important to know that they jailed, tortured people, they embezzled resources, and the reports are, they wildly committed all these atrocities against different ethnic groups and different people in different regions. So even brutally killing people that was also documented, and innocent protesters after the so-called elections that they had, which was also phony. So this didn't start just this last year or 2.5 years ago. This started after 91, and they committed such ethnic-based massacres in different groups of Ethiopia. So people need to understand that. And that's a quick summary of how we got here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll let Geddes talk through exactly what transpired recently.
Sure. So to kind of understand, to kind of add to what Kalalai just shared with us, to kind of add brief history of TPLF, right? And the way I remember history. So TPLF prisoned without any reason if you oppose their agenda. TPLF record of prisoners' treatment, whether physical or mental abuse of basic human rights, as was just surreal, right? It's documents has been written about that. TPLF relationship with the press, for example, 270 bloggers were blocked, or they purposely jammed the satellite dishes, right, to control people. Ethnic division to conquer power by all costs, as Kalalai said, and as an example of that, even, they would agree as part of the parliament, even with making peace with Eritrea, they did agree to that, but behind closed doors, did completely something different to sabotage that. Blatant government projects award based on ethnic cities, right? For businesses, business owners, and consultants. So, with all that history and more, looking in retrospect how we got here, I read, this is crazy. Now, I guess when I look back, it looks like things were really planned out strategically. 15 days prior to the major incident attack, General Deriba met with the TPLF regionals at the time. And shortly right after having lunch, the general fell ill and hospitalized. Rumors reported to the PM that, TPLF, there was high suspicion that they poisoned the general. Immediately after that, there was an interim general, which they completely rejected. And shortly after that, they kidnapped the General Adam, the interim, and then they attacked the Northern Command Force in the Tigray region. The gruesome attack murder on Ethiopian forces in their state. This is a major offense in the military, right? When a military base is under attack, let alone getting attacked by one of your own. So looking at every steps that they took, I think everything was planned out to the last second of it. And what amazed me is with all this facts, there were pressure from the West, right, to negotiate with them. Who does that? Which country has really even asked that? So it almost seems like there's a double standard when issue comes from Africa versus issue comes from the West, right? So yeah, that's how I see it. I know I said a lot, but
no, absolutely. I think for me, a lot of this happened because it was definitely as well out and planned as both of you have mentioned, and this is not new, right? This is not new. I don't think anyone is surprised that TPLF started the war. I don't think anyone is surprised that the war was coming, right? Because they've been warmongering for quite a while. Even the excuse they used to say, we don't accept Abiy Ahmed as a prime minister anymore because he did not do election at the appropriate time. For me, I think one of it's, such an Ethiopian political understanding that I have, it was kind of comical because why would election even matter? Because I don't remember the last time Ethiopians actually elected anybody, right? It was all done, as a facade, 100% elections, and, TPLF has always won the seats. But the other part is Ethiopia was not the only nation in the world that postponed election because of COVID, right? 70 plus other countries has postponed their election. And for them to say, this is evidence that he no longer has any rights to rule Ethiopia. So that we're just going to hold our own election and go as we wish, like you said earlier, that run the country as a private entity and do whatever we want to because we can, is one, quite arrogant. Two, though, it really is a true definition of what TPLF is and how they've been running the country. And to add to that, I guess, where do you guys think they got the confidence really to start a war against a nation of 110 million? As we mentioned earlier, that TPLF itself is not as large as we would imagine, as large as, I guess, their resources and their ability to shape different narratives as they wish to. Where does that confidence come from, Kalala?
I would say, seeing as to how carefully it was planned and executed, it leads me to believe that the contingency plan was there all along. So, when it wasn't enough to get the people to turn against the reform and some of the progress that we were seeing, the success, you know, they knew they had to kick into that contingency plan, which was to plan for a war against the federal government. So uh, I know that that's something that they had planned to reclaim central power all along, and that plan was triggered or launched with an attack, in the different regions like Baghdad and around the country to just throw the country in turmoil. So you got to remember, TPLF also had stockpiles of not just money, but these high-powered military arsenal that they had collected for decades. So the night of November 3rd and leading events that led up to that evening, as Kadis mentioned, it was all coerced and orchestrated. So a lot of people refer to it as essentially Ethiopia's 9/11. The one thing I want to also let people in your audience will understand is the best way to describe it in this situation is looking at the similarities to what happened here in the US. If you've gone to school here, elementary, middle school, or high school, you talk about the American Civil War that was fought between the US and the Confederate States in the South. But we don't even have to go that far back. If you look at just what we witnessed just the earlier part of this year, and it was broadcasted live, people literally died, right? During the stunning attack at the heart of democracy. We saw that when the mob members just marched into different government buildings, assaulting police officers and elected officials. So what happened in Ethiopia, to me, there's no difference. In fact, TPLF admitted to having this preemptive strike. I know there was media outlets that reported it, and some that spoke up some spoke up saying, yeah, we did this. So the actions leading up to the event clearly showed it was an attack that was very well planned and coordinated. So, so they had that confidence all along.
Yeah. Goodness, do you have anything to add to this?
So this is how I see it. The result of unearned power and status of 27 years, unaccountability to their crimes of oppression and mental slavery, and you add constant affirmation of being the golden child of Ethiopia for almost 3 decades. Simply all that got to their head, right? And I don't know if you guys know Arya Tesfamariam, the journalist. He's one of the early journalists that started reporting about TPLF. He's actually, his parents are from Tigrayan, but I believe he was born and raised in Addis. And he started writing about it because he wanted to protect the youth of Tigray, right? He knew how well what their motives were, and his job was to really educate the youth of Tigray to understand their motives and really pretty much wake up. And not only that, he paid the price. He's had an incredible strength of dedication to speak up while they were still in power. So if anyone has to share their story of what life was during TPLF years, he is one person that everyone needs to hear and listen to, I think, in my opinion. There's a lot that he shares about years life in TPLF time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes, especially now in the midst of war, something that we are tending to forget is how brutal TPLF was, even for those that they call their own, right? They pretend that the people of Tigray are their people and they're there to protect them and liberate them and such. But TPLF as a dictators never really care about their people. The people are just a means to an end. And as we're seeing now with the war in Tigray, this war is definitely has been a means to an end for Tigray, for TPLF to come to power and negotiate, because they have even said, war is not necessarily bad for us. It's a tool for us to come to a table and negotiate. So they're even willing to sacrifice their own for their their chance to be back in power again. So thank you for mentioning that, because we tend to forget that the people of Tigray didn't really benefit. Those that are actually living in Tigray didn't really benefit much from it. And I think there was this report also that UN has released, even before the war started, almost 1 million people in Tigray didn't have food, like basic necessities. I think I have that document here. About 950,000 people before the war didn't have food. And for a government that claims to care for its people and to drag them in the middle of a war, while 1 million of the 6 million are already in a struggle for food, is really a true definition of what a dictator is. So thank you for sharing that. Another thing that happened during, I guess, right around the war is also the Maikandra massacre. And I've seen, some human rights websites and blogs have reported on it and have said, this is TPLF's work, because there's no other army around to be able to do such atrocities in such a short amount of time. But now it seems that no one wants to talk about it, or it just kind of disappeared in the background. Now TPLF is trying to say, oh, that was never us, right? They're trying to find a different way to say, oh, somebody else did it, not us. So do we have evidence, really concrete, true evidence for us to say, yes, this is the TPLF's work?
Sure. So it's actually that's a good question. I don't know if you guys are aware, but Amnesty International admitted the course of civilians stabbed and killed sometime back in November about this specific issue. In addition to that, survivors and eyewitnesses told the story of day laborers and farmers attacked by Samri, the youth soldiers recruited by TPLF, right, to do their dirty work. But today, or shortly after that, although Amnesty reported it correctly, somehow that changed at a later time, right? With the Aksum reporting they put out. So it's a constant war of information was out, and then it changes. Now we have to come back and re-educate the public, right, or everyone. So yes, to answer your question, absolutely, validated by Amnesty International. In addition to that, people that survived from those incidents. So yeah.
Caroline?
The only thing I would add would be we know that the State Department had the facts and led to the U.S. actually condemning TPLF's attacks in the strongest terms. They didn't go into specifics with respect to Maikandra, but we know that intelligence is out there and they know the facts. But again, we're fighting disinformation and we're witnessing, and that's essentially what's muddying the water and trying to shift blames and switch narratives. But we have the truth on our side.
Absolutely. I think also something, what happened to those that committed these atrocities? Where are they? And thinking about that and realizing, okay, they're in Sudan, and they're probably the same ones that are giving information about what's been going on in Tigray. So like we've been saying, this is well thought out, right? They commit these atrocities and they move to Sudan as refugees, and they are now the ones giving information and, telling the tale of the war, however they choose to see it fit. And I think that's another struggle that we're going through. Like, who do we believe in when it comes to Sudan and what's going on and who committed what? And the greater sense of really pushing for we do need independent investigators in this, because our people are dying, and we're at a loss to say who's doing these atrocities. Because yes, war is war, but it's really difficult to say war is war and pass it, because it's heartbreaking for me to even really say knowing what TPLF is and knowing what they're capable of, even knowing that they would not have the softness of hearts to the people they call their own. With all these violations, how did we get to a point where now we're at a defense of what's going on?
Yeah, it's an important point, and I don't think it takes, it doesn't take a rocket science to kind of, look underneath the layers. We know that there's a well orchestrated, well oiled machine that's set up to demean and weaken the country. We know who's behind it. There's a push by a few vocal minority of TPLF sympathizers. We know that. We know they're working behind the scenes. They're all over social media and on all types of sites. But we also know that they're bankrolled with funds that were looted during the past, 27 years that the TPLF reigned in the country. So, but the other thing I want to make sure we point out as well is, let's not forget there's also that third party element with international actors behind the scene as well, because of Ethiopia's geopolitical spot, and then GERD. So, and Africa's largest dam. So I think there's a lot within that, but it's out there, and I don't think you have to be a rocket scientist to see, why we're in the position we're in.
Yeah, I think Kalalai covered it all, and the consistency, right? I think, we have to. I think what bothers me about this topic is there is an underlying doubts of what the country's is doing to get there, to get that information, right? And that creates a whole lot of chaos out here, in addition to actually doing the work. So in addition to everything that Kalalai said, I wish the West would respect the government body to do its work, partnership with them, and really find out if what the truth is before getting to a conclusion.
Absolutely. I think there's also something to be said about, giving the due diligence to every side of the story. And I think for me also, something I'm sure you guys have noticed is that whenever there's someone being interviewed anonymously, especially anonymously, and then that being reported as like the only truth, the absolute truth that is going along, and also this misrepresentation of the current, the law enforcement operation in Ethiopia as a war against not only TPLF, but the people of Tigray. So then that creates a narrative of, there's a genocide being committed by Ethiopian government on people of Tigray. Absolutely, people are dying in the thousands, right? And that's not something that we're going to sit here and say that didn't happen. But that ability to be able to shape shifts into different perspectives, the TPLF has almost earned the right to, whereas when it comes to what Ethiopia is doing and really defending its entity as a government, right? If, like, for me, the easiest way to explain it to folks that may not necessarily fully understand the ethnic division or the ethnic apartheid that we have in Ethiopia is that, think about a government, quote unquote, the governor of Washington deciding it doesn't accept Biden anymore. And therefore, he is going to now, stockpile or the army ammunition that he has. And he's going to train almost 80% of Ethiopia's forces were in Tigray when the war started, and train all those and go to war with the United States. And the media, Western media, is reporting that as, look at the United States committing atrocities and war against Washington. And people are being starved. People are being, leaving the states and then all that stuff. And Biden needs to come and negotiate with the governor of Washington. And it sounds really childish when you say it from a different country's perspective. But then when you're looking at it from Ethiopia's perspective, that's exactly what they're telling them to do. And sometimes I wonder, is it because they don't know what's going on, or is that because politically it's expedient to get to that conclusion? Kalalai could jump in.
I absolutely agree. I think there's multiple interests here, and it's important to understand there's been multiple resolution efforts even before what happened in November took place. There's a lot of efforts on behalf of Prime Minister Abiy and the current government, and even the elders, business folks in the country that were sent to negotiate so that we didn't have what we're having now in the chaos. All of those attempts were turned down. So, and there were, in addition to that, in the midst of all of that, there were multiple attempts to derail the reform process that were, through various methods, including an attack, assassination attack on the prime minister, and various atrocities being committed in different regions of Ethiopia. So the TPLF had, deployed their plots, and they had financially backed different, guerrilla warfares and different groups that were opposing the government, all to throw the chaos and, arrive to where we are at today. So in terms of the outside world and how people are reacting to it and why they're staying quiet, the question the question to me is it's not simple, but in my opinion, there is that element that we talked about of Ethiopia's location, and that the Grand Renaissance Dam, it serves a purpose. There is those who are in favor of what's in the best interest of their own country versus peace or prosperity in Ethiopia. So we have to be careful on how we look at that. We've seen that with the Trump administration and them putting extreme amount of pressure on the Ethiopian government during the negotiation with Egypt and Sudan. So, and even going as far as violating Ethiopia's inherent sovereign rights with respect to our own water. I mean, that's, so you see different positions being taken from different countries, all political, all for reasons that benefits this their own country and their own standing. So
Yeah, absolutely. And this, yeah.
So I think it's very childish, right? Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed tried for 2 years, right? Right after the internal conflict, when, I don't know if you guys heard the parliament briefing, details of what was happening in the 2 years before he got to that stage. And then once they realized, they're more capable and advanced, and we don't really have the grip of this, they started crying out for help, really, right? And it's sort of a childish game. People, lives were, number of lives, cost number of lives unnecessarily. It's like you didn't think of the outcome before we got here. But going back to why is there silence in the West, I think there are a couple different perspectives. One, we have to understand the West perspective in the way they look at Africa, right? Particularly Ethiopia, right? If we go back in time during the Battle of Adwa, Menelik II was Europeans' worst fear, right? Because we made history. Not only that we did not get colonized, but that symbol was a sign of freedom to the world around. So there's that grudge, if you would say, like not that an acceptance of that fact, but also there's this attitude about we're managing Africa. We've managed Africa. It is, everything goes as we say. So here's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed that truly emerged way ahead of his time, right? To advance not only Ethiopia, but the potential to be really a symbol in Africa in the 21st century. And I think they're having a hard time accepting that. And, supposedly it's democracy, right? So here's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed trying to do truly that, why can't we support him?
I think that definitely he's at least when he started, he was a scary leader to the West, because the first thing he did was he went and made peace with Eritrea. He went and made peace with the Sudan. You know, he had them sit down and talk. He went to Kenya. He went to Somalia. So he created this idea of oneness within Eastern Africa. And that unity is something that the West probably doesn't want to see happen, because they're going to lose their grip of, especially losing the Eastern Africa is in a sense losing the AU, because that's the center of the AU itself as well, the stronghold. So for him to be able to do that, I think within 9 months of him coming to power, it really is a scary prospect for the West that don't know who he is. I mean, as Ethiopians, even at least for me, I didn't know who he was. It just felt like he just came out of nowhere. For them not to know who he is truly, and for him to just become a prime minister and become beloved by people when he started. It might be a different story now, but at the time, he really did show us like there is that possibility of all of us living in peace, and Africa being all of ours, and us being able to solve our own problems and not needing, Western countries for anything. That is a scary prospect if you look at it from, the foreign relations aspect of it, because then are we losing, that power, that grip that we have on Africa by turn the resources that they exploit from it, right? So I get that for sure. Let's switch gears a bit to what's been going on in the cyber world, and the Twitter and Facebook and all the other social medias that we may have, and the narratives that's been driven. Just what have you noticed? And I guess tell us what's been going on specifically, and what you've noticed in that aspect as well.
So just to be perspective, I'm kind of new in the Twitter world, right? I kind of joke about it, saying my career started in November. And it is surreal, right? I knew false narratives existed because I was sort of managing uh, news like BBC, what was coming out. I was sort of doing that on my own before I joined Glean. And when I got to the world of Twitter, it's almost like having a conversation just by yourself. There are people armed, ready to attack if you are, for unity of Ethiopia or the reform or democracy, right? Betterment of Ethiopia. But what's interesting is the counterattack has nothing to do with the information you're putting out. Nothing. And it took me a little while because I had to reread it. But so it comes in an insult form, right? They attack you, personality or appearances, because there's no facts. They don't have facts to counterattack with what you're putting out. There's also another surprise to that. There's also a language barrier, right? What the thought process and what translates on Twitter, it takes a couple of conversations to really get to what they meant, right?
The Twitter world, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so there's that, and it takes me a couple of exchanges. So all in all, it is surreal on how fast its speed matter, but the amount of misinformation, and it's just, it is really, number is what beats it, right? So fortunately, we're a lot in numbers, unlike TPLF supporters, right? They have to create double, triple accounts in order to multiply their message. With us, it's more of recruitment to help Ethiopia at this time. So I think in general, to what I noticed, we've also made an impact, right? Because more people are joining Glean, and we have a lot more campaign. Even like there are a couple of campaigns we put out in overnight. because it was important. For example, when the United Nations met about maybe a month or two ago in Geneva, we thought it was critical to put a message directly pressuring them. Or the other example is when the Senate draft came out, we had to do that in less than 24 hours also. So I think I was all over the map, but yeah, so those are the things that I noticed.
Thank you. Kalalai, what have you noticed about, the cyber war, the narrative war that we are fighting right now on Twitter and Facebook? Yeah.
I think it's interesting and fascinating where we're at, and where we're at today. It's interesting that the current war is almost being won or lost in the court of public opinion. And if you think about public opinion, the cyber world is the place where you go to convince people or bring people to your side. Now, that's besides whether what you're saying is based on facts or you're simply spreading false information. So, what we're aiming to do with Glean, and why a lot of people are coming together who's never done this before, who's never advocated, who don't know what, diplomacy is even about, is because we realize we know what the truth is, but the world is seeing the side of Ethiopia that doesn't exist. And we're made out to be people we're not. And so that's why I got involved, and that's this story as well. And we have to be able to diffuse that and speak truth to power. So I think it's it is very interesting what's going on. So and you don't have to be an expert in in cyber warfare to understand it, because we see people, and some well-intended people. I've seen even celebrities being utilized and being used and to sell this misinformation out there. And so that's what I think of it as, and it's unfortunate. So we have to have the truth and the other side as well. And that's why we're doing the work that we're doing.
Absolutely. I think for me, I'm a silent watcher in the Twitter world. And what I found quite fascinating was how repetitive the message was. It's almost like 100, accounts would copy paste the same sentence. They wouldn't even bother to change those. And it's all the same misinformation. And by the time we're ready to correct that, they would already have 5 different kinds of misinformations going on. But not only that, the minute you say anything positive about Ethiopia, anything good about Ethiopia, they'll come after you. Like, Ethiopia, you guys are committing, a genocide. You guys are sponsoring what's going on in Tigray, as if people in Tigray are not our own people that are suffering. And the idea of like anybody with a flag, our Ethiopian flag, that's almost like a cardinal sin now to be caught holding it. And it almost they're almost trying to make you like feel like TPLF's crime against Ethiopia never happened, right? As if they care about people. Because for me, people that care about other people would have been on the front line fighting TPLF from the very beginning. Not only when it hits them, not only when they realized, oh, we're not in power anymore. And that ability, I heard this word one time, I thought it was really funny, and it's Adebabay. And it took me a minute to realize, oh, they mean like people that want Ethiopia to stay in peace. And like for them, it's almost like, how dare you say that Ethiopia should be one and, be together and united, because that's also now a crime to say so. And they've been really, I feel like, successfully been running that misinformation, even that propaganda, very, very well. And it almost felt like at some point, it almost felt like they were winning. I think now we're recovering from it. And like you guys were saying, a lot more people are jumping in there. But I think also that a lot of the diplomacy work that we may not necessarily on Twitter is been taking place. So I've seen a lot of the work that you guys have been doing as well. But that's something for me that just took me aback. Another thing is also how they, like, as long as they're doing it, it's okay. But if you're doing it, it's a crime. And that's with the election, election that Ethiopia has never had a free and fair election ever. Now they're like delighted that, oh, you think, this election is going to happen? Like it's all going to be fake. Irrelevant of the fact or not this coming up election is going to be fake, for me is like, why do you care? Like, how is that relevant to your struggle, quote unquote, your struggle? Because that Ethiopia never had a free and fair election. So you shouldn't be delighted. Like there's nothing to be delighted about, as if when you all are powered, when you were all in power, you did anything better or different, as if that's something that we should miss you for, right? There's that like almost gaslighting that is happening where y'all are gonna miss us kind of attitude. Just if you want to jump in here.
So I think the interesting part, this is the best way I can describe TPLF, right? You say right, they say left.
Mm-hmm.
You say red, they say black, right? Mm-hmm. So even going back to having their own election, right? They gave their agreement in parliament. They voted for it, turned around and blamed the government, right, for having for stopping the election. So now, fast forward, we're here. They don't want that, the supporters. So it is exhausting to a point of, do you even have a stand, right? So I sort of got sidetracked here, but yeah, it is completely chaos. Their plan is whatever there is to advance Ethiopia, we're against that. And I think to also go back, this whole understanding of the conflict, it was never against the people of Tigray, right? TPLF is a small portion of that area who's just on their own. So that's also critical to distinguish that when we talk about this conflict, because the people of Tigray are no different from the rest of us. So with that, I don't know if I answered your question, because I was kind of backtracking to add to what you were saying. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, you actually described it quite right. Anything that speaks for unity of Ethiopia, they'll speak against, and they'll find any nonsensical reason as to why this wouldn't work or shouldn't work. Kalalai, do you have anything to add to this?
I would agree. I think they have a playbook. It's clear. You mentioned earlier, the messages tends to come out of that same playbook. It's almost, there's a database that they're working off of. We also know that there are reports out there that thousands of social media accounts, including Twitter, Facebook, and the like, that were put out immediately following the event of November 3rd. So this is all orchestrated. They're bankrolled. We know. So this is all orchestrated, and it's happening from all angles of the world. So there are very few people, but they have the power, they have the money, and they have the resources behind them. So I'm not surprised that we're seeing everything and we're being put on defense. And I don't know that the Ethiopian people or the Ethiopian government is surprised that we're seeing this. It's that's why this work that we're doing is a huge undertaking. You're being put on defense. You're being put to have to explain some mythical lie that doesn't even, it has nothing based on facts. So, we're having to answer for everything in the kitchen sink that's being thrown at the wall.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's just, it really is exhausting. Not because the work is definitely something that needs to be done, but I think the exhausting part for me is, how do you continually, nonstop, right, be able to do this? But of course, when you think about it, even social media savvy, right, majority of our people don't necessarily know how to use Twitter, or they don't care for it. So they just kind of like only see what's going on Facebook, and Facebook is not, the thing anymore, and everything is happening on Twitter now. And when we're talking about numbers and ability, sometimes like when numbers are reported about TPLF, I'm just like, I don't know how to comprehend this, so I'm just going to skip it. And the Washington Post has reported, I think 2 weeks after the war started, 900,000 new accounts have been opened and have tweeted about the war in Tigray. And I was just like, I don't know what that means. Like, I can't comprehend it. And the Forbes report that came out that said they have taken out $30 billion outside of the country. And I literally sat down there thinking about, like, let me think about all the corrupt governments in Africa that we've been talking about and try to see where in that line does this $30 billion fit in. And like, it's not a sensible number for people, like for me to even grasp it, for me to truly understand it. So of course they're gonna have all the money to pay the lobbyists. So of course they're gonna have all the money to pay people to sit at home and tweet all day long, nonstop. And it's just that vastness of it is amazing. But at the same time, what you guys are doing and being able to combat that and being on the same foot now is just like, okay, so truth definitely does win, because it's not only just the numbers, but it's just common sense. Sometimes it's just simple common sense does the trick, and being able to put that out, you guys have been doing an amazing job with your organization. So I want to say thank you while I have the opportunity here.
Thank you. Just one thing to add to that also, right? We just started this and they've been doing this for years. So when I think about our success, right, it's surreal. In such a short amount of time that we've counterattacked in the world of Twitter, we've done an amazing job. They've done this 27 years, built their relationships, and we've only done it, December, and it's now April. That in itself is what makes me look. I mean, we have the number, we have the truth. It's only a matter of time to catch up with them or go beyond. The other thing is, this is a job for TPLF supporters. They're getting paid to sit behind the screen and just crank out the message, right? What is the qualification? Nothing. You don't need to have a degree. You don't need to have knowledge. Just pass this information 24 hours. So it can't get any easier than that.
Absolutely, it's the easiest job you could possibly have, as far as that goes. I if that was a job, honestly, there would be so many people lined up, because I know most of you are doing this as part-time. You already have a full-time job, you already have family commitments, and on top of that is some like what you're doing right now. So it really does fit that truth definitely does win at the end. Just one more thing on this topic. Do you think Ethiopia was ready, even could imagine the amount of misinformation that would be put out, and even the speed of the misinformation that was being put out? Kalala?
That's a hard question to answer. I will say we definitely. I didn't see the reaction of a country that was ready, so I don't know what information they had ahead of time. But there's also that the lack of resources and the lack of the priorities that you have to have as a country. Are you going to worry about feeding your people and making sure there's peace within different regions, or are you going to battle some cyber warfare on Twitter? So I'd like to think we were ready, but the truth is, this was something that we could not afford to lose. As I say, there's that public opinion, and so that's why I felt like we needed to step up, and that's why young people have to step up. I mean, and because there are a ton of people sitting on the sideline that wishes they could speak up, and that wishes they could be advocates on social media, but they don't have the know-how. So this generation that understands the importance of social media and advocacy needs to step up and do their piece to make sure our country's headed in the right direction.
Absolutely.
So I don't think, I'll answer that in two different forms, right? I think Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed exactly was ready. He knew, but I don't think as a population, we didn't even think this was going to happen. The TPLF not existing, I didn't think this was going to happen in my lifetime. So it happened so quickly too, right? 3 weeks. And We got that handled. Now the headache became everywhere else. So in that aspect, I don't think we are figuring things out as we go along. Um, so what's helping us though, like I stated earlier, in numbers, right? So it's gonna take us a little bit, but we have the strength, we have the number, we have the dedication, and we have the truth. Uh, so yeah, we're getting there. They started it, but hey, we got it. We got this.
Absolutely. I think something that's really horrible as well with the cyber war is, it almost makes it take so much time away from the victims, right? It takes so much time away from the victims because there's a lot of things that are going on in Tigray right now, right? From the famine to the rate that even the government, as I said, was reporting, to the displacement, right? Any, like, even the things that we can't see, and some of the pictures, some of the videos that are coming out is just it's almost impossible to process, right? And I can't imagine like having someone that lives in that region and not being able to reach out. And instead of trying to find solution to this, and instead of trying to situate and make sure this war stops, TPLF and their supporters are continuing this misinformation and this misrepresentation of this war to continue to stay in power by any means necessary again. And Ethiopians, us that are worried about our people, the only thing we really could do right now is send money, send clothes, send food. And we've seen millions already go to Tigray from multiple communities. So that's something that I'm really thankful for. But again, like I'm sure you guys would also agree with me, like we really need independent investigators going into Tigray and really telling us what actually went down, actually tell the stories of the victims, and really understand that for us as Ethiopia to never forget the cost of war. To really, really understand the cost of war, not because it's somewhere far away that you don't hear about, not because you're sitting in America and just watching pictures of it, but the day-to-day struggle of war itself, so that we don't repeat this mistake over and over again, because we seem to do this every 20 years as if we don't remember how much the last one has costed us and the human resources that we're losing that are supposed to help us build a country, because we're a poor country, but we continue to fight amongst each other as if that's going to bring the solution to all our problems that we have. But I guess most of our viewers might be savvy in Twitter, but really, what is the importance of having a strategic approach to the cyber world as a country right now, with the way things are going? Because right now, right, we all are on Twitter, like all three of us, so we know there's a war in Twitter. That we know there's this hidden war that may be hidden from the majority of Ethiopian Americans that live here that may not necessarily have Twitter or don't know how it works. Why is it important though to really get acquainted, just kind of look around, even though you may not be actively participating, to really understand what's going on?
Well, as I said earlier, the war now is being won or lost, and and the courts of public opinion, which is largely on the cyber world and social media. So we owe it to ourselves, our countrymen and women, and the children that don't have a voice, that are not, you can't afford social media, can't afford lights, let alone social media. So we have to understand and be accountable and be aware that there is a war being that's waged on truth, and that's happening right before our eyes, in the cyber world. So the disinformation, especially when they take things, there are people dying, and it's essentially a person is setting the fire in the house and then pulling the fire alarm and screaming, "Hey, there's danger!" So it's and then using keywords that stoke these emotional responses and switching the narrative of genocide and atrocities and rape being committed. These things are being committed. It's just that they're switching the narrative and blaming the wrong person. So it's something that I worry about, and it's something that if we don't all act, that can take our country deep into fear and hate. If we don't choose to rise above it, recognize it, be aware of what's going on, and understand the power that we have, and the knowledge that we could take a few steps to learn and become advocates. We have to be able to put ourselves in the shoes of a person that's back home that may be in danger of, uh, in danger right now in the midst of the war zone. So that's what we have to understand as individuals so that we can become an advocate and of peace and prosperity and human rights.
Thank you. At this,
So, in general, just think about the journey we've been with in technology for some time, right? Think about the way shopping has changed, just a click from your own living room. And the same way our communication has changed due to the fast pace of everything around us. So, our politicians or favorite celebrities are communicating with us live, and we must get on that change, not to be left behind. So it's also a form of holding our officials accountable in real time. As they say, right, the squeaky car gets the oil. So with our numbers, one message, our numbers can make it powerful. The amount of how much that recipient will receive that message every time the other person retweets the same message. So strategy is important, being at the moment, right? But strategically also understanding what's going on, what's the current pressing issues of the day, of the week, and communicating that in a way to not lose our audience attention, and pressuring the politicians. We know what, so they can think, right, of their decision too.
yeah, absolutely. That's definitely true. So how about you guys help me out? I have a Twitter. I don't necessarily use it as much. I kind of read some things in and I lose heart and I quit it for a couple of weeks and come back to it. So what is it that I could do, right, to really be an advocate without also with being able to process all the toxicity that's around it, right? Because it's really toxic out there. It's really like it latches onto your mind and it kind of like takes you out throughout the day, and you're just constantly thinking about that because you just can't believe somebody would say such a thing. And like, because I think most of us were raised better. What is it that I could do, and how can I be an advocate? I think this could also be an answer for most people that are curious. Kalalai, could you perhaps start?
Well, I would say every voice, I mean, anywhere helps advance the agenda of peace and prosperity we talked about. So I think number one, it helps you stay educated on the issues. Make sure you're following the right people and the media that reports based on facts and not opinion. And then you could talk to your family and friends. I mean, even people that are not online. I come across people that say, look, I'm not on social media. I, get the news every now and then, but how can I help? You talk to your first, number one, educate yourself on the issue. Talk to your family and friends and advocate within your own circle. Now, as far as a person that does have, a social media account or that wants to start advocating, I would say a great place to learn and get involved on social media is following, GLEAN, the Global Ethiopian Advocacy Network, Nexus. I'm sorry. And then, we have a number of tweets, and you can follow that. There's Unity for Ethiopia and others out there that are doing the work. And I say it's important, specifically on Twitter, because that's where the politicians, at least in the US, are. And they recognize when you have numbers behind you. Goodness talked about having strength in numbers. We have the people. We have the people. We're not on Twitter. We need to get on Twitter. We need to let the politicians and our representatives know where we stand, and we need to have them act. So, but we need to act in order for them to act. So, I would say it's a great place to just, you can read the tweet and then you can retweet it or you can like it. That in itself will make it so that it trends, and the politician now has to pay attention to it and dedicate some staff time to it. So that's a good way to get involved.
Thank you.
So you're gonna get a call from me, Hiwat. We can definitely use you. I can recruit. It's 10 minutes crash course.
I definitely need it.
But absolutely, right? Staying active with current events of Ethiopia to be able to manage the media in the West. So staying committed to educating people about our truth, including our non-Ethiopian friends. Our story must matter to those that we matter. And most importantly, by involving the youth. I love this African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child, right? So find a place, platform like Glean to contribute your passion. But first, be responsible to know what's going on, to understand the story back home and compare that to the story that's out here. And as far as how do I get utilized on Twitter, just be responsible to read the content, right? So not just retweet, but also it's your voice. But we have one more supporter, Kalalai.
Take it.
The recruitment right here. Something that I really liked about what you guys said is really be knowledgeable about the facts. Maybe, for a lot of people that may have grown up here, came in the same age or were born and raised here. One of the hardest things about Ethiopia right now is the politics is really confusing, because the issue is that we're trying to find reason behind the things that are happening, because that's how we've been taught politics is supposed to be run. But there's a lot of irrational things where when you say a lot of irrational things, the first thing you say is, okay, it's a lie. Like they can't be saying these things because this makes no sense. No one in their right mind would say, like right now, the thing that's going around is TPLF didn't start the war, and like they're passing that around. And there are so many videos of themselves claiming that the war has started. So for anyone that's coming into Ethiopia's politics, we look at it, it's like, well, how could they say that? That makes no sense. So I'm not going to participate in this. Like, this has no ration behind it. But I think I would encourage you all to say, really look at the basic things. We don't need to know who, Abiy Ahmed was, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is or was. We don't need to know who Debretsion is or was. We don't need to know any of the leaders. I think just the facts speak for themselves. Like, people should not be dying over a war that's not their own. I think that's at the simplest form. People should not die in a war that they have no benefit in. They're not going to benefit in any way, shape, or form. And I think that's the basic that we can start from if we are new to Ethiopia's politics or really wondering where to go from there. We're going to take a quick break and we'll finish up at the last few minutes of our conversation. For those of you that are joining us, please go ahead and like and share this conversation. And we hope that y'all are enjoying your holiday at home. And we'll be right back.
Adebabay Media የኔ ነው። Adebabay Media የኔም ነው። Adebabay Media የኔ ነው። Adebabay Media የሁላችንም ነው። የኛ ቤተሰብ Adebabay Mediaን ይመለከታል። የእናንተስ? Do your parents watch Adebabay Media? Watch, follow, subscribe and help Adebabay. Adebabay Media ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ።
Welcome back, everyone. And thank you for spending your Sunday with us. Kalalai and Kadis have been our guests today, taking time away from their family during the holiday. So I really do appreciate that as well. Just to kind of, go into understanding the depth of, what's going on in Ethiopia, and especially how that's been driven with misinformation and such. where are you seeing, this TPLF lines manifesting themselves in the country right now? Are there other places where you're noticing, like, if this wasn't happening right now, there are so many other things that we could be taking care of in Ethiopia, or if this wasn't going on right now, this would not have happened to Ethiopia right now. So, Kaila, if you could go ahead and start, and Idris, you could add to that as well.
Sure, and that's a tough question to answer. Unfortunately, it's because there's so many atrocities happening, right? So, in my opinion, the largest of which is the ethnic division that we have, that really TPLF sowed into the fabric of the country for almost 3 decades. So it starts with that. We have to understand, again, be aware that there is that war being waged on truth, and people being divided based on some, ethnic background or religion or language. So uh, that division in itself is serving a purpose for those few that want to regain power or that have something to gain from our division. So I think a lot of people are falling victim to it. They're not recognizing the strategy that the enemy is using, and how we can change that by thinking and focusing on the long-term goal for our country and peace and prosperity. So uh, it's something that scares me because I've seen, people that are close to me, friends and others that I know have been on the right side of the issue fall victim to it, because all of a sudden that's one part of an ethnic minority is, uh, being committed a crime against. And I realize the situation, and they all of a sudden lose, get emotional and lose, and want to speak out for that person, but they do it because they're a specific ethnic minority versus the human being. And we have to be able to rise above the fray and not fall into the traps of the enemy, because that's what they want us to do, is divide and say, hey, this person was, this person died because of their ethnicity. That may be true, but they want us to focus on ethnicity rather than why the crime was committed. So that's where I see the largest cost for us, and why we need to focus on the right issues.
Yeah, I love it, because I think when we focus on the, like, who died and what ethnicity was killed, so much more, we forget that by focusing that, we're disintegrating Ethiopia ourselves. So at this point, we don't even need TPLF to do that work for us, because we've kind of taken
Right.
out the baton for them ourselves. And it really is a strategy, a long-term strategy for them to say, look at what's going on right now, looking at what's going on in the center of Ethiopia, where Amharas are being selected and killed, and the rest of the country kind of watching in silence, because that division has already happened, where, you just kind of like, well, as long as it doesn't come to me, I'm gonna stick it out. And that idea of, like, yours and mine beyond what is Ethiopia and ours is taking precedence. And that's really heartbreaking to see. And that's something that we're doing ourselves actively, not necessarily TPLF making us do it. So that's definitely a good point to bring up. Thank you, Kalalai. And this.
So, kind of to add to what both you and Kalalai were saying, um, I'm a mixture of an Oromo and Amara, right? But growing up, I've never, ever identified myself as one or the other. And I still do not do that. And I'll never do that. I'm just an Ethiopian before I'm anything else. So that doesn't mean there isn't pride in the mixture of who I am, nor I wasn't raised in that manner, right? It's just, uh, it's a different world. It's a different world. The same I am Ethiopian has sort of different meaning too, right? As an example, when I describe this with such conviction, um, I get comments like, you must be an Amara. And there's this, like, what does that mean? I am an Ethiopian. So there's also that conscious, and we also have to be conscious about that that conversation out there, right? So I think overall, I see a confusion of identity in the upbringing generation and destroying the core identity of Ethiopiawinet, being an Ethiopian. When I grew up, I did not know the ethnic group of friends and neighbors. We were just Ethiopians. As Kalalai said, we are falling, whether we know it or not, just into that trap. So I think it's also, I think the prime minister said this in his back in November, when he addressed the parliament. He said we have to be very careful not to come in different forms of what junta was, right? So he was talking about the ethnic division, having one just changing the name and reappearing with the same mentality. So to me, Ethiopia is all I know, and Ethiopia will be all I will know until I die. So I hope we'll get there. I hope we'll get there.
Absolutely, that's beautiful. I think something you hit right on the head is that it's really difficult to imagine for me Ethiopia in the different divisions or different maps they're presenting themselves into right now. Because then most of us, majority of Ethiopians, I guarantee you, would be stateless, because we are all a mixture of every kind of ethnicity we could possibly imagine. So how are we going to say this is going to be Oromia and this is only for people of Oromo? And what does that mean? And who's Oromo will come into a conversation. Then we're going to continue to kill each other because we're not Oromo enough. We're going to continue to kill each other because we're not Amara enough, right? We're not Tigray enough. Because there isn't one person that could get up and say, I'm just this and that's the only thing I am right now in Ethiopia. And so unless Ethiopia exists, unless Ethiopia survives as a country, unless Ethiopia continues as one nation, then none of us will have a state to speak of. And we have essentially done the work of TPLF for them without them even being here, by dividing it and saying, oh, this is only for these people and this is only for that people. And again, I think everybody, we've been talking about this as well, that the Constitution itself starting with we, the nation, nationalities, and peoples, right? Like it completely negating individuals and it requiring you to belong to one ethnic group or the other. Pick between your mom and your dad to belong to the nation of Ethiopia, right? In effect, making, having a prerequisite of being Ethiopiawinet before, not just because you were born there, not because you are one, but because you pick an ethnic group that you belong in. And that idea has really, truly gotten into our bone right now, where we have a hard time, we're having a hard time sympathizing with people that are dying, right? Because we tend to put ethnicity to the person that's already dead. Like they are not in this world anymore. How do we now turn around? Is like, oh, that's just this ethnicity or that ethnicity, or just even fight over who died so we could get a higher count of our ethnicity dying, and really losing our humanity in that sense is really heartbreaking, and it really is a manifestation of what TPLF has been doing the last 30 years of in Ethiopia. If you guys have anything to add, I'll go ahead and do this as well.
I think you summed it up pretty well. I mean, united we stand, divided we fall. So we have to understand each other and acknowledge, have respect for individual rights and human beings. We have to celebrate the differences among us. I mean, it's a beautiful nation with over 80 different ethnic minorities. That's our wealth is in our differences, and we have to be willing to celebrate that and not let it be the reason why we can't continue to progress as people. So, it's something that we have to be aware of, especially those of us who live in the U.S. We're seeing that the racial and social justice happen right before our eyes. So if we can't learn from what's going on here, I don't know when we'll ever be able to learn.
Get this?
I think agree both with what was said, but to kind of add one more point, I often wonder if I was back home, what my ID card would say, right? Because you're automatically put in a corner, but who chooses that? And what does that mean in identifying me, right? Like you said, a lot of us are mixed, but how do you just pick name? Does that really tell you who you are?
Yeah.
So it is surreal, like on how it's beyond me to understand that, let alone to understand the impact, the result of that. So I'm hopeful that we will get there, at least to see it. So.
Yeah, I hope so too. In that note, I'll go to my last question. What is your vision of Ethiopia? What do you wish Ethiopia to look like?
Is it for me or Caroline?
Just you.
Okay, so I would like to see Ethiopia the way I would like to see the Ethiopia I had growing up, right, where identity was Ethiopia, being an Ethiopian. I grew up with friends knowing we were all Ethiopians, not Tigray, Amara, Afar, or you name it. Our ethnic cities didn't have much place to identify us. I literally came to learn of people I grew up with since fourth, fifth grade of what they were in the years of TPLF. So I would like to see the culture and tradition of genuine love, concern, and well-being of each other, despite all the hate and killings TPLF has taught in the last generation. Most importantly, I would like to see trust reemerge within all of us. Um, I went back home a few times during the TPLF years, and it was sad to see that trust, which was so second nature in not only people that you know, but people that you did not know, wasn't there. Everyone was suspicious about one another because of the political climate, right? So I want to see. I also want to see the last generation success in integrating with the identity of Ethiopianet, right? Being Ethiopia, the Ethiopia that I know, embrace each other with our multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-language. I would like to see Ethiopia's economic growth and prosperity and dependency on our own natural resources, whether it's farming or industries. Above all, my dream is to live to see prime ministers of a democratic reform institutionalized where Ethiopians collectively respect democracy and honor Ethiopia above any self-interest, right? And I know it's a lot of hope that I have, but I truly want to see Ethiopia become the beacon of hope for true democracy, not only in Africa, but an example of right here, U.S.
Yeah.
So it's a lot, but I can hope, right?
Hey, that's beautiful. Honestly, you took every word out of my mouth, so I don't know if I have anything else to add. Kalela?
It's a hard act to follow.
Right?
I
You
would
got this.
agree. I believe that change is inevitable, and the question is whether we'll have it by desire or disaster. I think that's a quote I read somewhere. Anyhow, I will say one of my favorite heroes, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., talks about, especially towards the end of his activism, right before he died, he talked about, even beyond equal rights for all people, he wanted to focus on a beloved community that's rooted on love. And he calls it agape love, which means like unconditional love. I think it's in that type of spirit, that type of love, that you can transform all people. So even the opponents, you can have them join you, because if we're for human rights or for people to respect the human rights, they have to start from a place of love. So I wholeheartedly believe that. And if you start from a place of love, then you wouldn't have the issue. And that's the stories that my grandfathers and my grandparents taught me and told me, and that's the country that I still hold dear. Is that even when a person doesn't know, or they're traveling for days to get to the next town, they can stop by and have a place to sleep and share a hot meal. And that's the story that I hold true. And that's the country that we have. So my wish for Ethiopia is, it'll become a place that it once was, and even better. So where people immigrate to and not from, and we become the head and not the tail of every economic, human right, and healthcare measures that we see. So, and the only thing that's holding us back is the ignorance that leads to fear, and that fear that leads to hate, and the hate is what we're seeing play out with all the atrocities, which is the violence. So that's my wish for Ethiopia.
Absolutely. I think I'll just add one thing. It's really difficult to add anything onto this, but as you were talking about, Martin Luther King, something came to mind, and for him, his whole fight was about good and evil, right? It was never about racism. It was never about, the evil white men, or, the poor old, like, black people. None of that stuff. It was just good and evil, and he knew that battle was about good and evil. And I think for Ethiopia, I want us as a nation to get to that point where we understand what's going on in Ethiopia is a battle of good and evil. It's not somebody doing something to somebody else, right? It's us doing all the horrible things to each other. Like, we have to take responsibility both for the good and the bad. Because if there are so many bad, evil things happening in Ethiopia, then how did we allow that to happen? Right? Because when there's so many good things happening, we are so proud to flaunt it, even though we didn't do anything, we had no part in that, then we have to also take responsibility to the evil that's happening right now. And I think if we start from that place of saying, there is good and there's evil, and that is, the battleground that we're going to start from, we have easier time fighting the hate and, the disintegration and the integration and the fear and the mistrust that we have. And another thing I wish for is, when I wish people would stop saying, I will never forget and I'll never forgive already, before, all is said and done. We've already made up our minds to never forgive and to never forget. And that's not going to get us anywhere, right? Because by the end of all this, we have to be able to sit down and say, what did we do wrong, and where did we go wrong, right? Because if we're all responsible to the good that happens in the country, we should all be responsible, at least feel some sort of responsibility to the evil that happened. And the minute we say, I will never forgive, or I'll never forget, we're already saying, oh, that wasn't me, that was them that did it. But we all came from the same society, right? We all came from the same place. We all had the same lessons that we've been taught. So something has gone wrong within our community that we need to look at and say, okay, we need to fix it. And this is really all these we're seeing, right? All the symptoms that we're seeing, all the horribleness that we're seeing across the country is really the result of us sitting complacent of all the bad things, all the evil things that have been going on for the last 60 years, and just kind of thinking, oh, that wasn't me, right? That wasn't me doing it. But we are all quick to say, oh, that's a good thing, I'll take responsibility for that as well. Now, that's my wish for Ethiopia, for us to say, all the good and all the bad, we're all responsible for, and we'll do better next time, instead of trying to, hold grudges and be proud of the fact that we're going to hold grudges forever, because we are faithful people, right? We're Christians or Muslims, right? In none of our faith does it say that hold grudges. That's actually one of the sins of all of our faith, to hold grudges, and that's not going to get us anywhere as a nation, and that's not going to get us anywhere as a country, as individuals, as a family unit, none of it. So that's my wish for Ethiopia.
Will prevail.
We will prevail.
Yes.
I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah. So we've been sharing some of the information of Glenn, where people can find you all on Twitter, and if you just Google them as well, they have a website. So if you guys could tell us again where we could find you, and any last words that you want to share with us, Kalalai, I'll give you the floor, and you can just speak with us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having us. I think people can get involved. You can Google Glenn, GLEAN, this Global Ethiopian Advocacy Nexus. Just get involved, and like you said, we're fighting spiritual warfare, good versus evil. So stand on the side of good and be good. So thank you.
Yeah. And thank you too. I'm going to find you, Hiwat, like I said. But yeah, just get involved and thank you for having us. That was a great conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for making it. It's been a wonderful conversation to be had. And for those of you that are, celebrating the holiday, I promise I'll put on my Abashak Amis and go see family right after this. I live in the Pacific side of things, so I still have a lot of daylight to participate in the festivities. And I hope everybody had a chance to do that as well. Next week, we'll come back with a really awesome program that we have for you for the Tsewa'e program as well. And until then, we'd like to wish everyone a holy week. Let us pray for Ethiopia. Honestly, this is a good and evil like we talked about. This is a time for us to pray, try not to blame anybody for the mistakes that we have, and see which parts of those mistakes that we could take responsibility for, and how we could better raise our children and our community and be a support for each other, and instead of trying to break each other apart. So that's my message for everyone, and happy Tsewa'e for next week.
Thank you. Same to you.
Have a wonderful.
አደባባይ ሚዲያ ለወገንተኝነት ጀርባውን የሰጠ ጊዜያዊ ጥቅምን እምቢኝ ብሎ የዘመመን ሊያቀና እውነትና እውቀትን አስከትሎ ኢኮኖሚያዊና መንፈሳዊ መረጃዎችን እንካችሁ ይላል። ትኩስ ዜናዎች፣ ዘጋቢ ፊልሞች፣ ጥልቅ ትንታኔዎች በአደባባይ ሚዲያ ይቀርባሉ። ራእያችን ጊዜውን ያማከለና ዘመኑን የዋጀ በእውነት የነጠሩ መረጃዎችን በእውቀት ደግፎ ለሀገራችን ብሎም ለዓለም ሕዝብ ማዳረስ ነው። አድሬሳችን አደባባይ ኢንፎ ሚዲያ @gmail.com፣ ዌብሳይታችን www.adebabay.com። ያግኙን፣ ይርዱን። የሁላችንም ስለሆነች ኢትዮጵያ በአደባባይ እንዘግባለን። አደባባይ ሚዲያ